If you read the paper, you find that a number of Democrats are saying, well, we ought to try to impeach the president. But if they take back Congress, can they do it? And if not, why not? Well, there's a book called The Case Against Impeaching Trump, written by Professor Alan Dershowitz, and he says impeachment is a big mistake.
Trump, traitor, treason!
President Trump had only been in office a few months when the calls to impeach him began, and they haven't stopped.
We believe that President Trump has violated the Constitution, and we've introduced 5 articles of impeachment.
But as the drumbeat for impeachment grows, one prominent defender of civil liberties in America, Alan Dershowitz, says not so fast. He says in the fervor to impeach President Trump, his political enemies have ignored the text of the Constitution. Dershowitz lays out the reasons why those pushing for impeachment should think again in a new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump.
Well, attorney Professor Alan Dershowitz is joining us right now on Skype. Professor, it's delightful to have you with us. You've written a book. Tell me what the Constitution says for start off. What grounds do you have under the Constitution for an impeachment against a sitting president?
Well, I think, Pat, both of us learned at Yale Law School that the first place you look when you're asked a question about the Constitution is to the text of the Constitution. And the text says that in order to impeach a president, you have to convict him on a 2/3 vote in the Senate of either treason or bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the framers meant what they said. They rejected a provision that said you can impeach a president for maladministration or being a bad president. You need to show that he committed an actual crime. And there's just no evidence at the moment that President Trump has committed an actual crime. Now, some Republicans have fallen into the same trap because they wanted to impeach Rod Rosenstein, and Rod Rosenstein hasn't committed any crime. So I'd be against impeaching Rosenstein. I'd be against impeaching President Trump. And if Hillary Clinton were president, I'd be against impeaching her. I just don't think you can impeach based on disagreements and policies. You have to prove the existence of an actual crime.
What is a high crime and misdemeanor? Has that been defined carefully by the legal scholars?
I would say it's been defined carelessly, not carefully. The framers had in mind something very interesting. They didn't mean any ordinary crime. I'll tell you a story about Alexander Hamilton that really explains this better than anything else. When Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury, a man and a woman decided to set him up, a married couple. And so they sent the woman to seduce him, and she did. And then the man demanded extortion, and he paid it in order to keep it secret from his family. But then the man accused him of using Treasury funds to pay the extortion, and he denied that. And he wrote an essay causing tremendous embarrassment to his family, admitting the affair, which was adultery, which was a serious crime, and admitting paying the extortion, but denying that he used the funds from the Treasury, because he knew that using Treasury funds would be a high crime, a crime involving governance, whereas simply committing adultery was a crime, but it was a low crime, not a crime warranting impeachment. And I think that's the difference that Hamilton and others, Hamilton, after all, wrote the part of the Federalist Papers that dealt with impeachment, so I think he knew what he was talking about.
Well, you point out that there's a rule that we have established about coming against sitting officials doing their constitutionally appointed offices. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We cannot either impeach or prosecute a president for acting under Article 2 of the Constitution. Under Article 2, he's entitled to fire anybody he wants. That was held by the Supreme Court. He's entitled to pardon anybody he wants. That's an absolute power. He's entitled to tell prosecutors who to investigate and who not to investigate. It's not a good idea to do that, but Thomas Jefferson did that. John Kennedy did that. Many presidents have told prosecutors who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. And you cannot be charged with anything criminal or impeachable for merely exercising your authority under Article 2 of the Constitution.
Well, what about this thing about collusion? Is there such a thing as a crime of collusion?
Yeah, if 2 business people get together and collude to violate the antitrust law, that's a crime. That's the only crime of collusion in the entire federal criminal code. But if a candidate has a meeting at his home with his son or whoever in order to get dirt on an opposing candidate, that's not a crime. That may be collusion. I don't think you would even use the word collusion to define that kind of meeting, getting dirt on an opponent. But even if there were collusion, it wouldn't be a crime. You'd need to show a specific violation of federal election laws. You'd need to show some kind of bribery or extortion, some real crime. But simply colluding with another country, even a country we don't like, is not in violation of anything in the federal criminal code.
Well, you were talking about, you're, of course, opposed to this special counsel, and you've come up with a very unique concept about how we should deal with this Russian involvement. Well, what do you suggest we do?
Well, it wasn't all that unique. We did it after 9/11. We appointed a nonpartisan commission of experts to look at how to prevent a future 9/11. That's what we should have done here. We should have appointed Justice David Souter, former of the Supreme Court, Justice O'Connor, other experts, former heads of the FBI, the CIA, to look into the whole issue of Russian involvement in our election. Russia did try to intrude in our election, and they're going to try to do it again. And that's a serious problem. But you should have had a commission doing it in the open with transparency. Instead, we have a special counsel operating behind the closed doors of a grand jury room. And we're not going to learn very much. And he only hears one side. He only hears the prosecution side. He doesn't hear the defense side or President Trump's side. So I think it was an ill-advised method. I was opposed to special counsel when it was appointed to investigate Whitewater, and that turned into an investigation of Bill Clinton's sexual activities in the Oval Office. So I've never thought special counsel is a good idea, and I don't think it's been a good idea in this case as well.
Well, you have an interesting chapter in this book about Whitey Bulger, that his involvement with the FBI, and Mueller was head of the Boston office. Was that tainted? Well, what did they do wrong?
Oh, they did everything wrong. It was the worst time in FBI modern history. There was this guy, Whitey Bulger, who was a real, hitman, murderer. He had a brother who was the head of the Senate in Massachusetts. And in order to protect the Bulgers, who it turned out Whitey Bulger was an informer with a guy named Rifleman Fleming, they accused 4 people of committing murders that were in fact committed by this Rifleman Fleming, who was an informer. And for years, they kept these innocent people in prison. 2 of them died in prison. 2 of them finally got out. They brought a lawsuit. They collected tens of millions of dollars from the government for this cover-up. But you can't ever get your life back if you've been sent to prison improperly. And Mueller was the U.S. attorney in Boston. He was the head of the Justice Department's unit in Washington and the head of the FBI while all this was happening. He was also head of the FBI when they were searching for Whitey Bulger, and they were not searching very hard. He was in plain view, living in Santa Monica, and reportedly, walking in the streets. And even there was one report that he used to go to a Red Sox bar, a bar in Santa Monica that has Red Sox fans, and he would sit in a special back room and watch the game. And people knew there were shirts that were printed saying, "I saw Whitey, I saw Whitey." But the FBI, the great FBI, couldn't find him. And a lot of people think they weren't looking very hard because they didn't want to find him because he could have made the FBI look very bad. Look, the FBI is a wonderful institution with great people, agents who put their lives at risk every day, men and women. And we should be so proud of the FBI, but there are some bad apples. And the question is, who were the bad apples that allowed this terrible scandal to go ahead, both in Boston and in Santa Monica, California?
Would you advise Trump to sit down and talk to them, or do you think the counsel is correct in saying don't do it under oath, he'll get you for perjury?
Oh, listen to your lawyer. I said on television once I had 4 pieces of advice for the president: don't tweet, don't pardon, don't fire, and don't testify. I think the last one is the most important. They're going to ask him what his motive was for firing Comey. And he's going to give an answer. It may be a truthful answer, but somebody else will give another answer. Or he'll be asked whether he knew about the meeting in the Trump Tower, and he's already said he didn't. And you have Michael Cohen, saying he did. So you never allow a client to say anything that will be contradicted by anybody else. That's called a perjury trap. Even if he's telling the truth, the prosecutor may choose to believe the person who's testifying differently. So I would not advise him to testify. I'd advise him to fight the subpoena in court. In 53 years of practice, I have never had a client sit down with a prosecutor and testify. Prosecutors aren't trying to help you. They're trying to get you to commit a crime. Ask Martha Stewart. She learned that lesson in a very hard way.
That's right. So, well, I hope the president will listen to what you're saying on this program. But, Professor, thank you so much for being with us. It's a tremendous book, and I recommend it to our audience. And thank you so much for writing it.